Hail them.
Hailing frequencies open, sir.
Hailing frequencies open.
I don't know why I keep giving alien street food a chance. It's always such a gamble.
Captain, we're being hailed.
On screen.
Hello and welcome back to another Hailing Frequencies Open podcast, our first of 2023, where we are trekking through the past and future of Star Trek. As your host, I'm Mike Jones. As always, I'm your host, Mike Jones. I don't know how I said as your host. As your host, I'm Mike Jones. Not as your host, I'm somebody else. This week, our good friend and co-host Damien is with us, joining via the magic of the internet in our virtual studio.
Hi, Mike Jones.
Hey. We have been, as a group, so freaking busy that Erin couldn't be here tonight. She was supposed to, but then something came up, PTA meeting or something like that. So it's
what kind of PTA doesn't make an allowance for a famous podcaster? I don't know.
Right, exactly.
Well, our friend of the pod, Lenita, made sure to tell me that we are at our best when it's three of us.
That is so true.
She's strong, Team Erin. And so, sorry, La, you can tune out now. It's just me and Mike.
Well, I've always maintained Erin is the smart one. So she adds a level of intelligence.
A Data or a Geordi.
Right, exactly.
Yes. Or Troy with the blue uniform on.
Right. Late season 7 Troy.
Yeah.
So something happened as we were on our hiatus. We missed an important anniversary. January 3rd was the 30th anniversary of Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
I can't believe that.
That's crazy.
Very old. I have a strong memory of my experience of watching that pilot.
Yeah. It's funny. I thought I have a memory of I feel like I was younger. I looked at the dates and I was 13. But I feel like I was 10. You know what I mean? Like I feel like Deep Space Nine was on forever. But actually, no. Yeah, I was in 8th grade when this show premiered so long ago. So for our conversation today, we're just going to talk a little bit about the about the pilot episode, including a synopsis, and just talk about Deep Space Nine in general, how it's been viewed over the years, its popularity now, and where things might be going in the future. So let's just jump in with The Emissary, or actually it's just Emissary. There's not the
I think it's just Emissary. The Emissary, strangely enough, is a Next Generation episode, you may remember.
Yes, and that's why
Season
I'm confused.
2, the introduction of Kalar. And I hadn't watched it in a while, so I said I made Colby watch it with me.
Oh, good.
My better half is not a Niner. You wouldn't call him a Niner.
Yeah.
In fact, he is. It's a polarizing part of the franchise in this film. He's very indulgent with watching all the new Trek with me and watching Next Generation here and there, but Deep Space Nine is clearly a bridge too far for him. So that colored my experience of my rewatch.
It's hard because the show doesn't really get good until, there are some gems in season 1, but then it really gets good a couple seasons in, really.
Yeah.
I tried to make
there's a strong handful of gems along the way.
There really are. Yeah. Years ago, I tried to make Tim watch it all because he bought it for me on DVD, for Christmas one year, and I was like, "Great, now we get to start Deep Space Nine." And we got through the pilot and maybe one more episode, and he was like, "I don't care about any of these characters." And I'm like, "No, come on, it's fun. No, keep going. It gets so much better." But
it's funny watching this the other night. What struck me though is how good the pilot is. And what a good job they do of building this world and introducing all of the characters and
every new character gets a good moment, even though it's the infant version of some of these characters. It's season 1 Bashir is hard to watch.
Yes, yes, but that is well, I mean, we may get to this down the road, but I think that was by design. I think they did that. I think that was, um, that we're charting the growth of a sort of. I mean, what do you even call him? Like, he's such a pain in the ass at the beginning, but
Right.
there's a trajectory from there, and that
That's true.
he becomes one of my favorite characters because
Yeah.
you watch him evolve from this sort of impetuous kind of kid
Like
into
puppy dog. Yeah, kid.
Mhm.
It's also I'm just going to say spoilers, I guess, for anyone who might not have watched the series. But much
30 years
later,
ago.
or from 30 years ago, much later, of course, we learn that he is an augment, that he is, genetically enhanced. That was not part of the character when they originally wrote him. But I
No.
can't get that out of my head as I'm watching. I'm like, what he's doing makes no sense. He's so much smarter than this. But then I have to, remember they hadn't put that in to his character yet. It's weird. It's weird. So before we get too far in, let me just go through the quick synopsis. It's very brief, and leaves out a lot of stuff of Emissary. So 3.5 years after his wife died at the hands of the Borg, led by Locutus at Wolf 359, and following the Cardassian withdrawal from planet Bajor, Commander Benjamin Sisko and his son, along with a new crew of both Starfleet and Bajoran officers, take command of an abandoned Cardassian space station. Bajoran religious leader Kai Opaka meets with Commander Sisko. She declares that he is the emissary of the prophets or the Bajoran gods. The crew discover a stable wormhole to the Gamma Quadrant, and that inside that wormhole, aliens who are non-corporeal and exist non-linearly, who, guess what? They're the prophets, make contact also with Sisko. And that's a very brief summary.
Yeah,
any
you
really
mentioned,
important things that I left out,
I mean,
other than all the characters.
all of the introduction of all of the characters, and
Right.
and also some choice moments with the one and only Jean-Luc Picard.
Right. Yes. There's a nice handoff at the beginning of the show, where you get to see the Enterprise, you get to see Captain Picard, and the first time that Sisko meets with Picard since Wolf 359, when Picard was taken over by the Borg. So it's this really tense, awkward.
It is cringe.
It is because we love
I did
Picard.
Yes, and that we know how he. Yeah, it had been a long time since I watched that scene, and it was very, to know how scarred and tormented he is from his experience with the Borg, and to know how he carries that with him, and
he
to
couldn't
watch
even talk
him.
About it. He didn't like when Sisko says, "Oh, we have met before in battle," at Wolf 359, Picard just clams up. He's like, "Oh, because he hasn't reconciled it yet. He's still dealing with it, and is still dealing with it years later in Picard. In the show Picard."
Well, and it seemed like a choice in that moment more than it didn't seem like a clam up to me. It seemed like, this man is struggling. Like he is still struggling with his demons from that experience, as am I. Neither one of us is this is not going to go well if we lean into this. So let's just get our business done here.
Yeah. When a 13-year-old Mike saw this scene and just did not like Ben Sisko because of it. I was like, you're being so not understanding of Captain Picard and what he went through, and it's not his fault, and why would you be mad at him? You know what I mean? And I didn't understand. Now I look back at it, and Sisko's dealing with so much. I mean, the prophets keep bringing him back to that moment, saying that he lives there. He lives in that moment where his wife died, because he hasn't been able to move on from it. And so looking back at it now, I'm like, oh, there's some really sort of deep therapeutic stuff there that 13-year-old Mike did not get.
And of course, the captain that he has to deal with is the one who was the Borg that he faced. Right. It just is. It is layers upon layers for him. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing that I found out in doing my research, we've often heard Star Trek described, reportedly by Roddenberry in the beginning, as Wagon Train to the Stars.
Mhm.
That's kind of how he sold it. Wagon Train, of course, a very popular television show at the time. Deep Space Nine started out as The Rifleman in Space. So
The Rifleman. I was searching for what the show was because I've read this somewhere and I couldn't find it.
yes.
What is The Rifleman?
So it's about a guy and his son. His wife has died, and they move to this edge of the frontier town in New Mexico, and settle in and whatever. It's they're stationary, and people come through the town. So at its core, it kind of did do that, but then they moved away. That was just the very beginning jumping off point. It got so much more complex than that. Now I haven't watched The Rifleman in years. I remember my grandmother liked it. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. It's another Western.
Well, yeah, and it is interesting that that of course they mined that as the source material for inspiration, at least, if not source material, but that
Right.
It makes perfect sense. Yeah.
I also love that they brought some things that started in TNG, the Cardassian occupation of Bajor. That plot started in The Next Generation, and originally Ensign Ro was supposed to be a part of the cast. Or the crew. She was going to be the first officer, but the actress Michelle Hurd turned it down because she wanted to turn
Michelle Forbes.
Oh, Forbes. Sorry, what did I say?
Yes, Michelle Hurd.
Oh.
Rafi.
Very different.
Yes.
She wanted to focus on film instead of television, which is always the way. So then they pivoted and created a Bajoran character who is not a Starfleet officer, and I think that actually works out a lot better. But
yeah, I mean, I can't help but think through like how that would have played out and how those characters would have been together and what that would have been,
Yeah, she would have been really torn, I think, as she was in TNG, between her loyalty to Bajor and being in Starfleet, in a way that Kira never was. Kira's alliances were always very clear. Like, she was there for her people, for the people of Bajor. And she worked with Starfleet, but was fine to not, if that wasn't best for them,
Right. And so it externalizes the character conflict, that she is in conflict with, well, very often with Sisko, as opposed to, having a more, I feel like a Ro character would have been like you said, an internalized conflict. She would have been, struggling with her own choices as opposed to.
And Kira was basically a terrorist. I mean, that's probably a harsh term, but no,
I mean, they made that very clear.
Yeah,
they made that very clear that she was a terrorist, and it was interesting. That's one of those things where you're like, is that dated? Like, would we be seeing a terrorist character like that on Star Trek now? Like
a protagonist.
10 years later.
Right.
Would they have ventured into that territory given sort of where the world went for us all?
I think absolutely
I wonder.
Not. Nana Visitor has said in interviews that if that show had started post 9/11, like right after 9/11, the character would have been completely different. There's no way they would have introduced a terrorist fighter fighting for her people and her religion as a protagonist on on Star Trek. And speaking of religion, this is the first show where we really lean into religion. It's always been this alien thing. They might visit a planet that has a religion, but like there's a little bit of looking down on that. Like, oh, they're a little primitive. Sure. They're not developed. But Bajor is a religious society that we learn a lot about and respect in a way that I think Star Trek never respected religion before. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm trying to think of an example of a positive or even
Yeah.
complicated, complex portrayal of religion on Star Trek prior to that. And I don't know, it was always sort of based in ignorance. And, and this is an interesting take on it because the prophets are real.
Right.
The prophets are actual non-corporeal entities that live in this wormhole that lives that near their planet, and that they have interacted with over the years, and they have sent these orbs, and
it's tangible.
It is tangible, it's real, and they, so the difference isn't whether their gods exist, it is whether they are gods or just an unknown life form. Like, they are real.
Yeah. Well, that's a very Star Trek notion that they visit a planet and the people on the planet don't realize that their god is an orbiting space station, or
Right.
like Injustice, or that they're being lied to by a trickster god, like in The Devil's Due, and it almost leans into that, where the Starfleet officers see them as the wormhole aliens and call them that throughout the series, but the Bajoran characters call them the prophets because their prophets. They do worship them as, and
they have what a prophet has. They have a knowledge of the future because time is
right.
not linear to them, and so they have the gift of the prophecy in religious terms. That's what that is.
Right. I would be interested to know what the Bajor creation myth is. Do they believe the prophets created them? I don't know that they ever went into that in the show.
Well, the other thing that's interesting, that when they first introduced the Bajorans on Next Generation, Captain Picard says in one of his captain's log narrations that the Bajorans were a flourishing society with arts and culture when humans were not yet standing erect.
Oh, right.
So they're an ancient culture, right? That's what they've told us. And that yet the orb activity is only 10,000 years old.
Right.
So there is we don't go that far back in Bajoran history, and where all that comes from. And
I'm sure someone has. Some novelist has dealt into it. But in canon,
and if we're being honest about Deep Space Nine, I don't think they were like short on religious based storylines. I don't feel like they needed to go deeper. I think they were pretty thorough with it. But yeah, it was I think that the traditional Star Trek depiction of religion wouldn't have yielded long-term storylines.
Oh no!
If they didn't respect, if they set this station in a culture, in a religious culture,
right,
and that made us look down on that culture in any way, it wouldn't have been able to sustain itself. It had to have some level of real, and we know it's real from the first pilot, where the monk sees him and says, "It's time now."
Right, right up front. It's also, I think, important that the prophets are confusing to us. They're an unknown entity. It's not like we find out that they're worshiping Q, someone that we know. But that could happen. A planet could be worshiping. There could be a Q who is, toying with a planet and sending them, But if they had gone that way, we never would have given them the onus that they're, that their religion wouldn't have seemed valid if it's like, oh, they're worshiping Q. Like, okay, we always would have looked down on that.
We also took we don't immediately know that the prophets that their larger intentions are in line with Bajor, or in line with.
Sure.
We don't necessarily know that they're protective of that planet, in a way that warrants worshiping from them.
Right. That's true. We don't know their end game.
Can we talk about Kai Opaka?
Yeah.
I loved her, and I when she met her fate later on in that first season, right? She doesn't die, but she gets stuck on the Gamma Quadrant planet where you like sort of keep dying and are immortal, right?
Yeah. I mean, for all intents and purposes, like they killed her off, like
right. Yeah, they sure did. They sure did, and I was always very angry about that because I thought she was an amazing character, but for the sake of drama and story, you know, the Kai that we get, that we get Louise Fletcher as Kai Wynn down the road,
right,
is so much richer source of storytelling.
So complex, a very complex character. And I think if we had started with her, if Kai Wynn is the one who told Sisko he's the emissary, we never would have believed.
No, because she's reluctant to believe it herself.
Right, exactly. So yeah, we have
very unsettling to her that he's that.
Yeah. Not to steal from another podcast, but I was listening to the Inglorious Treksperts recently, and they were doing their top 100 Star Trek characters.
Yes, I listened.
And they talked about Kai Wynn, and one of the things they said I think was so great, I have to repeat it, that she, like, her gods are like I said, tangible, they're real, and they have chosen not to speak with her. It's not like her faith is questioned and it's something that is intangible. It's like real. No, they're real. Like
they're real. She knows that they're real, and
they talk to other people.
Talk to her.
Right. And the hurt that must take, affect her. That's a fascinating character.
I know. And yes. And also at a certain point, you're like, okay, prophets, like this lady is gonna fuck some shit up. Like, just get in her ear and whisper nice things and calm her down, please. Like,
they were not interested in that.
Nope.
Yeah.
They did not care about her.
I've always thought of her as kind of like the Pope of Bajor.
Yes. Yes.
The other thing, sorry, I'm looking at my notes. Like, what else was I going to say? Oh yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about the shift from TNG to Deep Space Nine. It's new uniforms.
Yes.
They're kind of like the cadet uniforms that we've seen earlier because it has the color on top and black on the bottom.
But they're when you first see them, when Sisko is wearing his like traditional like TNG uniform and takes his first step onto this, O'Brien is the first person you see wearing it. Yeah. And you're like, oh, this is like a working uniform. Right. This is like a uniform that you wear when you like get shit dirty.
Yeah. I thought of it at the time as, well, if you're on a station, you wear this uniform, and if you're on a ship, you wear the other. But then when Voyager came out, well, they wore the Deep Space Nine uniforms, so that flips that in its ear. I like these uniforms.
Yeah,
they're I don't want to say more flattering, but it's a lot of dark fabric, and that's flattering. I'm just gonna say
it's I feel like it's more forgiving in a lot of ways. Yeah. And it was interesting too. I mean, the part of this episode, and it sort of definitely concerns the uniforms, that I read very differently this time around was when O'Brien goes back to the Enterprise to say goodbye.
Yeah.
He puts on his TNG uniform to go back to the Enterprise, which is funny, right? Because it feels so much dressier, right? He changes back into his Enterprise uniform to go say goodbye.
I didn't catch that.
Yes. And he's like very, he is the O'Brien that we know on Deep Space Nine from the onset. He's like in there fixing shit. He's like, he kicks the transporter to make it work, right? Like he is like
the Cardassian technology.
He's the everyman. He's like casual. He's like straightforward and honest. Pulls no punches, right? And then he goes back on the Enterprise, and he walks around and doesn't see anyone he knows. Right? He goes to the bridge to say goodbye, and then he doesn't, like, he opts against talking to Picard. And he has there's literally no, like, he says, what does he say? He's like, send me to the ops pad, Maggie, right? To like his like replacement or whatever. Like, and he walks around with like this feeling of, I mean, it looks like, it's sentimentality towards the ship, but it feels sort of alienating, right? There's no like,
there's no goodbye
farewell
party
for him, right?
Yeah.
So it feels like, very sad. And then Picard appears,
right. He's like,
right,
oh,
and is able to
you,
like, right. So it's, it works out for him. But God, that moment is like highly colored by Star Trek Picard, which to me is like, that is the story of a man who does not know how to have an emotional experience or know how to like connect with the people that he cares about.
Yeah.
And so he gives this like very like spot on Jean-Luc moment of like he clearly has like some sort of emotional attachment to this officer that he does not, that he either doesn't know how to express or opts not to express.
Right.
And there's this like loaded moment, and then he just beams them away, and that's that.
Right. Yeah. Picard's not just bad with children. He's also bad with people.
Right. But it was like, but Patrick Stewart plays those as like so loaded, where you're like, you really felt like he like had a feeling for O'Brien, and he was sad to see him go. And then O'Brien's like, it's just a transporter, and he can't come up with an answer to that.
Yeah. I mean, in the universe of Star Trek, these kinds of transfers must happen all the time, right? I mean, you just, you can get wherever the fleet needs you is where you go, kind of thing. But in the world of television, of course, it's an actor moving from one show to another. So I think the audience needed that little crossover. Yes. The audience needed that moment.
Right, because O'Brien is the connector character.
Right.
And that he needed to be specifically connected to TNG, and he needed a specific goodbye in that. Like, and I get that. And I think that, everybody talks about, there's another podcast that I listen to that I recommend. I don't remember the name of it now, but the question to the guest is always, what does Star Trek mean to you? And everyone's like, hope for the future, optimism, all that stuff. To me, it is always, it's about friendship. It is about your crew, and it is about, those crew moments, that we got with, Kirk and Spock and McCoy in the beginning, and those, that we, that we still have when Riker and Troy return in New Trek, that there are those connections, and it's a very emotional thing to like a fan,
right?
So you feel that moment of him like walking around the Enterprise and being like, does this crew does this crew value me? Will they miss me? It's so sad.
Not to make it sound like the Fast and the Furious, but it's about family. It all comes back to family.
A
couple other things I noticed watching this episode, just generally it's lit darker than TNG was, and they have the station is a Cardassian design, so it's much more alien, less comfortable. You have to step over thresholds on some doors and weird things like that, which they talk about. A lot of trip hazards,
yes,
not safe.
No,
well,
I would not do
OSHA.
well. Yeah,
no,
I would stub my toe so many times.
Here's a question. So we're 30 years later, and we've seen TNG come back in the form of Picard. Could DS9 come back in some form? And has it already?
I mean, sure, Lower Decks goes to DS9.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
It is a
We've seen Nana Visitor.
we've seen Nana Visitor.
And Quark.
Quark. Yeah, I feel like there are so many. I mean, well, this conversation may not age well, depending on the next several
Exactly.
weeks, next
Right.
couple months, actually, because we have been told that Picard is paying homage to the great '90s Treks, so which has to include Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
If only because the movie's always sort of ignored. With maybe there was the Defiant was in First Contact, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
other than
Whatever excuse they had to get Worf in the movie was the only real reference to Deep Space Nine.
Right. They kind of just ignored that he had that life.
Right.
And I think maybe it just means that they won't ignore it now. I don't know. But I don't think that it can do a reboot the way that because Avery Brooks doesn't want to come back. I don't think.
Yeah. I've heard that he's not interested in coming back.
Well, also, I mean, Terry Farrell, what are they going to do there?
Right.
Spoiler, people, they in season 7, the very end of season 6, they one of the great Star Trek missteps.
Yes. They should have done whatever they could to keep Terry Farrell.
Yes.
And
she didn't. Actually became one of my favorite characters in a way that was not evident in that pilot.
well, again, yeah, it's like a proto version of Dax. Like she's so different later. We also have lost a couple of actors from the main cast. Rene Auberjonois. I never can say his last name well.
Auberjonois.
Right. Sadly passed away. Aaron Eisenberg, who played Nog, has passed away. And if Avery really doesn't want to do it, then yeah, I think the only way we're going to get more Deep Space Nine is these little tie-ins with other shows.
Yeah,
which
or
is
random.
Fine.
Yeah. I wonder if we see Nana in these new Treks. I mean,
right. Well, in Lower Decks, she's running Deep Space Nine, right? Like she's the commander.
Right, she's moved into Sisko's office at the end of the series. Like it's her station. Yeah,
right. Did you see that documentary they did?
Oh yeah, what we leave. It's
behind?
Like almost like the title of the final episode, and now it's gonna make what we left behind, what we leave behind. I don't know.
Yeah, what we left behind, maybe. Well, and they come up with. Yeah, we could look it up. Listener, you can look it up. Well, and I think they do this writer's room thing where they pitch like another season.
They do a season 8 pilot, which was really, really interesting because you realize also that so many of the great Star Trek writers moved from Next Generation to Deep Space Nine.
Yes.
And it was amazing to see them all in a room, like what that must have been like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even their proposed, Nog plays a huge role in their synopsis.
But they kill him off in the first episode.
I know. That's Aaron Eisenberg was not happy about that.
No.
He was just a great person from all accounts.
But yeah, they also made Kira Vedic.
That's where I was going. Yeah,
like
she's not head of the station there. She's like she's the new Kai or a Vedic. Yeah.
No, I think it's because the station has been turned into a religious site.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I see.
I think that's what they were. Yeah.
I only watched the documentary once when it first came out. So
it's great. It's easy. It's easy to rewatch. I think I should. If you're listening to this and you have not watched it, I recommend it.
Did the Voyager documentary ever come out?
No, I think it's forthcoming.
Oh yeah, that's I want to see that.
I think that's the one that's going to make us all really cringe because it's going to be a lot of Robert Beltran Chakotay saying bad things about.
How unhappy he was or is, or
well, and there's all this. I mean, yeah, there's all this like YouTube footage of Kate Mulgrew at conventions. Like she didn't think people had iPhones, just saying nasty shit about her castmates, and you're like, really? You didn't think anybody was recording this? You didn't think this would come back at all?
Well, she and when during the show, she and 7 of 9, Jerry Ryan, thank you, famously didn't get along, and I mean, I think they do now. I think they've patched that up, but she didn't react well to that casting, that addition to the cast, and I wonder how they're going to address that. This documentary has all of the workings of being, very good reality television.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting for the Deep Space Nine documentary because it made it very clear that whatever sort of tension there was in that world, that it was with the producers.
Yeah.
Like the only, Mark Alemo, the guy who plays Gul Dukat, was had like a 20-year grudge that he wasn't getting notes, that nobody was like guiding his performance or giving him feedback, and 20 years later they had to be like, we loved your performance, that's why we didn't give you feedback, because we just wanted you to keep doing it, we kept bringing you back. Like all of those like weird old resentments are not like between cast members, they're like by how they were treated by the writer producers. Right.
And that's part of why Terry Farrell left. I think that she was unhappy with some of the off-screen drama, but it didn't show up. It didn't color her performance. I mean, she's just amazing. I really hope that we like maybe we'll see. I mean, I guess we can't see her. I guess she's dead, but I really hope we see some DS9 people in Picard.
I think we will. I don't know, but then and there's so many layers of like. That's the other thing about Deep Space Nine, that the pilot doesn't really indicate, which it already like does. It had its hands full. But that right. There's this rich depth of supporting characters that people were very much a part of that show that kept coming back, and those supporting characters were really integral to that.
Yeah.
And there was the whole they all rehearsed at Armin Shimmerman's house. He would have everyone over for dinner, and all the like Ferengi family people would rehearse there together.
I was just about to say that show did so much for the Ferengi in fixing the problems that happened in TNG with the creation of the species or the race, because not only do you have the main character Quark, but Nog and Rom, and all the episodes on Ferenginar, and like it really did a lot to make them fully fleshed out people, and not just like Yankee traders.
I mean, Nog, it's only a paper moon. Do you know this episode?
Yes.
Nog loses his leg and comes back. I mean, he's got the like he has essentially his PTSD and hides out in the holosuite.
Right.
And I mean, just like what a, first of all, amazing. I think a lot of the holodeck stories got a little bit tired, but this was like a really interesting use of it. This was not like the Barclay Holo addiction. No. This was like used as a refuge for PTSD, and this sort of like self-aware but not sentient. Right, we cover this in a previous podcast.
Vic Fontaine, right?
Fontaine, guides him through it. But like, what a great character what episode that was for that character. And
they gave him such an arc, because when we see him in the beginning, he's this almost stereotypical Ferengi. He's like wheeling and dealing and getting involved in stuff.
He's the bad influence in the neighborhood,
right? Yeah, he's like the bad. He's the friends that Sisko doesn't want his son hanging out with, and then he goes to Starfleet Academy, and the whole war arc later is also something that they were really brave in doing, I think. I don't think they ever could have done addressed war in the way that they did in Deep Space Nine in either of the other shows, TNG or Voyager.
Right.
And
I think Voyager is the whole reason that they were able to do it, is because
right.
the producers were distracted on another show, so the writers
Right.
did their own thing and didn't have any oversight.
Yeah, the producers were too worried about Kate Mulgrew's hair to pay any attention.
Deep Space Nine was off the radar.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. The 90s.
Yeah. And I think they did a lot of really great Klingon things.
Oh yeah.
That you never, and of course, obviously it came with the addition of Worf, but like,
right,
you never got that the pilot doesn't indicate that we're going to get any good Klingon stories, and we definitely do.
We didn't lose anybody when we got Worf either, right? He's like another main character salary that they added to the show, right?
Yeah, everybody was really afraid that they were, going to be displaced by him, and he just sort of blended into the ensemble.
That never happens. I mean, just look at Jeri Ryan joining Voyager. We had to lose Kes, who might have already been on her way out. I don't know. I mean, but because she had some issues, but like, yeah, I don't know. Well, 30 years later, it is, I think, one of the most popular Star Trek series that's streaming. It had a renaissance, like in a 20 teens world. What do we call that decade? All these people, I think, discovered it on Netflix, and it really got a following. Then it needs a good HD remastering,
which I don't get the sense is coming.
I don't
anytime soon, because I mean, what does that get them? I don't know.
Very expensive.
Yeah.
It and Voyager both aren't pretty to look at compared to
It's funny though. I think it does, in retrospect. I think it is more serialized than anything of its time. It was it was groundbreaking in that, but I think it suffered from that sort of from trying to be both things at once, right? That it couldn't quite really be serialized because of the like first run syndication thing that it was doing, right?
Sure.
And so that it wasn't quite what it wanted to be along the way. It was like stuck between multiple genres in a lot of ways.
And serialization was difficult in the age of appointment television.
Right.
I mean, it was hard for me
because also like Fox 68 WSYT in Syracuse could have aired it any way they wanted. They had no obligation to air it to get every episode, or that was a thing with Star Trek, is that oftentimes these local stations would kind of do what they wanted with it.
Yeah. And in the last couple years of the series, I was in college and didn't really keep up or keep track with Deep Space Nine. I barely kept up with Voyager, because if I missed a couple episodes, it was hard to jump back in, because, Nog lost a leg. When did that happen? You know what I mean? Like, there was continuity that it doesn't lend itself to popping in and out. And we couldn't afford no TiVo. So I don't even know if TiVo existed in 1998.
I think it probably, it may not have. I also was college age for the later part of it. And I confess was maybe a little too cool for school at certain points.
Sure.
And I was like, I'm not into that anymore.
Well, I
had to rediscover Star Trek, and especially Deep Space Nine, for sure.
I mean, I still look to Star Trek for a certain escapism that the darker stories don't lend themselves to. So I think that's part of it. I haven't rewatched the first 2 seasons of Discovery because they're so dark. It's just not what my if I want to like chill on the couch and watch Star Trek, I want to watch, Captain Picard tuck on his shirt and sit on his purple carpet, I like the comforts.
Yeah. So what was interesting in watching this the other night is that a lot of it, like I said, I watched it with Colby, and he was very drawn in by the early parts of it. And then when it gets to that part where he's with the prophets, and that the whole story becomes much more cerebral.
Yeah, it slows down.
It slows down, and I could just feel him being like, "Oh God, this," and the funny thing is that the actual content of that story, the idea of like trying to explain the nature of how we experience time is different from how they experience time. And then it comes back around and I'm like, no, it's not. You keep going back to the same time over and over again. Like, and you keep bringing us, we don't bring you here. You keep bringing yourself here. You bring us here.
Right. Just trying to get the audience to think about time in a non-linear way is really difficult, and I think they achieved that.
I think they did. So I was definitely of two minds watching it, where I was like, this is some like really forgive the phrase, this is some like timey-wimey like really like loaded cerebral sci-fi idea stuff here.
It's Jeremy Bearimy.
Now you lost me.
Oh, that's from The Good Place.
Oh, okay.
Where time is mapped out with a line that happens to spell out Jeremy Bearimy.
See, now you have to say that to Colby, because he would have gotten that. So we're all mismatched nerds here.
I love it. Yeah, Tim has a Jeremy Bearimy poster in his office. So,
oh my God.
Anyway,
I will bring that up when Colby gets home. But it was it slows that episode down, and it's like, and when it cuts back to Deep Space Nine, you're like, because they're trying to move the station, they're trying to claim the wormhole for Bajor. It's like exciting. There's like a ship battle, and then it's like, like back in the like white light,
the white light, that white washed out. It's rewatching it. I noticed that I was. Not that I was like, ugh, but it's a totally different energy. I'm like busily washing dishes or whatever, watching the show. And then once they really get into that scene with the prophets, it's like I'm washing a little slower. I'm watching, and now I'm just like watching the TV. It's not, popcorn eating entertainment. It's much more cerebral.
Yeah. And I don't know if they could have, cut. Do you know if they could have made that happen faster? Because it is such a needle to thread the story that they were trying to tell with that.
It had to be there. They needed to give us the time to follow them on the path.
All right. Now here's a question: is that what we learn down the road? Spoiler coming, right? That Sisko is actually part prophet.
Ta-da!
Right.
Right.
And that he ends up essentially going to live with them at the end, right?
Right.
Do you feel like this first story is, granted, they didn't know that's where they were going with it.
Absolutely, they didn't know that.
Do you feel like that sets up where they ended up being? Do you feel like we had like that, given the story that they tell from the onset, that is a plausible, satisfying place for it to go at the end?
I'm going to say no. I think that making Sisko part prophet or part wormhole alien, I think muddies the waters in a way. I think him being the human who comes to this place gives him a unique outside role. He's not Bajoran. He's not, of the wormhole or from the Gamma Quadrant or whatever. But so I was disappointed actually in Sisko's ending. I guess I don't know what would have been more satisfying. He and Cassidy Yates go off and have a lovely family. But it didn't go where I wanted it to go for him.
Wait a second.
What?
Joseph Sisko Jr. is Cassidy Yates's son by Ben Sisko, right? She has a child at the end.
Right. Yeah.
That just occurred to me in like a new Trek.
Oh.
Just saying.
Interesting.
There's I don't know.
Yeah, he could come back.
I'm not feeling an Avery Brooks return, but they, you know, and I hate, I don't want to get into this business of trying to read tea leaves from Alex Kurtzman, but right, he says we've reached a point where we have to acknowledge the true importance of Sisko and Star Trek.
Oh, he said that. Well, and
like
you know, the kid would then be part prophet, right?
Yeah.
Oh, and so is Jake.
Well, we haven't seen that from Jake yet, but
right.
Maybe we see Jake. I don't know. But the other, now I'm sorry, I'm jumping around Sisko monkey braining here, but he other thing that struck me that I didn't realize is that he blackmails Quark into staying from the first episode. That is like his first like real command decision is that he keeps Nog in prison and blackmails Quark into staying and setting up shop.
That's funny.
Isn't that funny, right?
Yeah.
And I saw that as a seed of, you know, the great, I mean, we get a handful of truly great Deep Space Nine episodes, right?
Right. I know where you're going.
With Kira, we get In the Pale Moonlight.
Yes. Right.
Which is like literally like no other Star Trek episode because of the way that it's structured and the way that he tells the story, and that he saves the day by doing something terrible.
Right. That was the right thing to do, but it goes against his and Starfleet's moral code.
And the entire moral code of the show, you know,
right?
What Star Trek purports to be about.
Right.
And so it was an interesting moment. I was like, oh, they're literally like laying the groundwork. Obviously,
like
not on purpose, but like they're laying the groundwork to be like, this is a captain who's making different moral choices.
Yeah.
That he's still the good guy, but he's getting down off his high horse.
Yeah. Well, and
hard to be on.
Later, when he's pursuing the Maquis defector Eddington, really goes to a dark place.
Sure does.
In a way that we never, like Picard. I mean, I guess Picard became Locutus, but he wasn't himself. Like, he's such a different character from any captain we've seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
he is from the onset in that first episode.
You're right.
Is a very meaty character from the very beginning, more than we've seen in any other character in any Star Trek pilot, I would say.
Yeah, and a parent. We see him being a dad, which is new. Like that's being.
We've never actually seen a parent on Star Trek before that.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Crusher is not. She wasn't written as a parent.
No, she was not.
Sadly, but and that's it. End of list. Like, there's no other main characters who have kids. I mean, well, Worf, but he's really a bad parent.
Oh my god, yes.
Like, worst dad aboard.
Yes.
Fistful of datas aside. Well, listen, friends, we have talked for over an hour, or just about. So I think we should probably wrap up and go watch.
Well, we know that Lenita
9.
tuned out as soon as we said that Aaron wasn't going to be here. So.
I know. I should just have Aaron say random smart things, and I'll edit them in.
A few sound clips. Yeah.
Yes. We miss you, Aaron. I hope you're having fun in the 6th grade PTA meeting or whatever it was. Oh my gosh, I love it.
Well, this makes me want to go watch the first regular episode of Deep Space Nine.
Right, yeah. It makes me want to skip ahead to like Duet and some like good season 1 episodes.
I want somebody in the world, and I'm sure this exists, that I want someone to make like a watch list That if
Mm,
I want to like get the story arc,
yeah.
like what can I
Here's the
skip?
bullet list.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's got to be out there somewhere.
I'm sure there's competing versions.
Everyone send us your list.
Yes.
And you can do so on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Hailing Freak Open. You can find our webpage, hailingfrequenciesopen.com. And of course, listen to your podcast or listen to us wherever you get your podcast. Give us a 5-star review if you like what you hear. If you don't like what you hear, you're still not listening. So
if you got
like,
this far and
what
you're
I
not
mean?
giving us 5 stars, what the hell?
Right. Then that's bizarre.
Get a
Tell us
hobby.
why. And with that, I'll say Hailing Frequencies closed.